There. I call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper.
Here.
Councilmember Victoria. Here. Councilmember Wright.
Here.
And if I can just point out that Councilmember Clay is out of town. She had a death in the family, and she's still out of town, but will return next week. And we'll go to council comments next. I have a few, but I will do one first, which is just to point out the obvious to those in the room, that we are now meeting in the Azalea Room since the destruction has started in the council chambers, which is moving well on its way to becoming the new council chambers / auditorium. And I think we all look forward to the transformation that will take place over there. I never can quite remember what the time frame on it is, but I think we're looking at a return, a hoped-for return over there sometime in February. Is that correct?
The maximum time by contract is 180 days. The contractors indicated they might be done in as soon as 4 months, but they do have 6 months to get the work done.
Okay, so a little unclear, but we will be in this room as our primary secondary council chambers, and we also look forward to trying to get out into the community and have some meetings in some other places. So anybody who has any ideas for places to go and topics to cover in having meetings out in the community, please let me know. We did have the one about the Tacoma Langley sector plan. You'll notice that there's a little bit of new equipment in here. My understanding is that some of the purchases of that equipment have been to use both the council meetings in here and at other times. Okay. Or put a few bucks out with the sound. Using those, having those available for other kinds of meetings in here that might need to be televised. You'll see what I call the little R2D2 cameras up here. So this is being filmed. Those are good cameras. They do zoom in and out. So if you're thinking that, oh, nobody can see what I'm doing in here, they do move around. They do watch. And we're trying to make this as council-like as possible here. We've got some arrangement, and we're probably going to get used to it here, so I hope it works. And those at the end, are there any other council comments? Well, that's one of the
The first thing I want to talk about is speeding on Ivy Ranch Road. I'm glad the chief is here to ask for some additional enforcement between the district border and Philadelphia. Got a number of complaints about, in particular, traffic coming from DC that direction, into Tacoma Park. The speeds have been excessive as late, so if we got some enforcement there, that would be great, some speed enforcement. The second thing that reminds me of is that I think it would be good to have a session where we review the effectiveness of the speed camera. I think we had kind of a mean review at one point. Look at that again, and also start to have a discussion about if they are effective, are there other places that we think that they should exist in the city? And I know we did a speed study in the past. Should we relook at that? Are there other locations that we should potentially be tested? I think that location, actually, in my ward, would be a decent place to consider a speed camera. We also think about the Volvo unit was something that I think we was on the table when we approved the two fixed cameras. So I hope that could be something for future discussion. The second item would be, I hope that we could have a work session related to dog parks relatively soon. I know this is an issue that's been sparked by what happened at Ed Wilhelm Field, but it seems to me that we should come up with a solution that's maybe a little bit more forward-thinking and factors in the situation across the city. And I again would cite that I think Brookline, Massachusetts has a very interesting model where they're also a space-constrained municipality, and they have created multiple uses for parks. So there's certain times of the day and certain parks where you can be off leash with your dog. They even have, some of the parks are completely fenced in, like you could imagine actually being able to do that around the field at Spring Park, so that dogs could truly be off the leash and someone wouldn't have to worry about the dogs running down into the play area or off into the neighborhood. And it seems like both a smart solution in terms of how much space we have, but also probably an economical solution not to try and carve out some additional land either through a purchase or co-opt a current park just to create a specific dog park. So I hope we could get that on the agenda and discuss it, realizing that probably implementation of that would take a while because there will be, although it will be economical, there will be some budget considerations, and also some of the fields that I know people use and have been discussed as potentially being used are county fields, and we need to work through the county on those issues. And then to your question, Mayor, I think a good location for a meeting and topic would be to meet in Old Town somewhere to talk about the potential of carry-out beer and wine liquor licenses or some variation on that. We talked about that in the council meeting in the early spring, but we didn't really reach resolution. And one of the things we realized we needed to do was have more conversation with the community about how people would feel about that in that particular area and location. So I would advocate that would be a good location. Thank you.
Idea. Other council comments? Councilmember Robinson.
I'll just follow up, Josh, your comments about dog parks and say that I've talked with a couple of people who see the broader, the value of having a broader discussion as well. And one of them is talking to the former head of the Washington Animal Rescue League, who also is a resident. And I'm hopeful that we'll hear that we'll have some folks who can contribute to that discussion that we have on broader issues.
Okay, I just want to cover a couple things real quickly. I wanted to note that Folk Festival was a little over a week ago, and I thought it worked out very well, and there continued to be community volunteers to put it on. A reminder that it's all volunteer run. And I know that the work on next year's Folk Festival starts now, and that the committee kind of does a run-through of what worked and didn't work this year and starts to recruit additional people. And there's lots of opportunities for people to either contribute a lot of time or contribute a little time. They're always looking for people to help with that. And it's one of the things that our community is best known for, and next year will be the 33rd Annual Folk Festival. So anybody who's interested, please go to their website. Thank you, tpff.org. And that's how they're kind of operating with volunteers and information now, is through email on the website, so it's very easy. And I would encourage folks to do that. I also wanted to comment that I thought we had a good tour last week of the Public Works facility. Some folks were along to see what the existing conditions are and hear about what some of the proposed solutions are, and we will be revisiting Public Works facility and the project and funding and everything else, but I hope that was helpful for people. Another thing that happened in the last week was the announcement on Thursday about the latest round of the latest shortfall in the state budget. And this one was much bigger than anybody anticipated after the one that was just dealt with the end of August. This one is a $683 million shortfall, which is guaranteed to generate a new round of adjustments in the state budget. I'm not sure how soon those will come. I'm not sure what those items will be, but I know some of the items under consideration include the income tax, and I saw in, I guess, Friday's paper that about 2/3 of that shortfall is the lower level of personal income tax receipts by the state. And that is a source of funds for the city where we get a portion of the portion of the county's portion or a portion of the state's portion. I know it's 17% of the county's of the income taxes on those properties in the city, on those individuals in the city. So if we assume that those numbers are down just like they are across the state, they probably won't have to do anything to reduce our numbers. They will just reduce, and we'll see what other areas are proposed, but any of the process that we might go through to deal with any potential shortfall for this year will be impacted by whatever else is coming down the road from that announcement as well. And the final item that I wanted to just mention now, and I'll go into in a bit more detail in a later agenda item when we talk about appointing members to the Task Force on Environmental Action, was my attendance at a conference last week in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was the quarterly meeting of the Chesapeake Bay Program Local Government Advisory Committee, which I am a member of, appointed by Governor O'Malley. And we learned a great deal of information about in particular for the city to deal with some of the particulars of what's going to be coming our way in terms of stormwater regulation. We've known that this was coming for years, but this is tied to the increased efforts by the federal government, EPA, and the Chesapeake Bay Program, strengthened by President Obama's executive order on regulation of pollution into the bay, and that this is going to be a very strong regulatory environment where it has been voluntary up to this point, and voluntary hasn't worked. So there's going to be a lot happening in the next 12 to 18 months in that area, and as I said, I'll go through a couple of the particulars of that during the later agenda item, but that is coming down the road and will also affect our budget and what we are required to do. Did you have a question?
Didn't have a question. I had one more council comment that I forgot to make. So
Go ahead.
if you're done,
I'm finished. Go ahead.
Your comment about the Folk Fest reminded me of this, that the Tacoma Park Street Festival is coming up October 4th from 10 to 5 p.m. I know that they need volunteers, so if you're interested in volunteering for that, there's a wide range of fun things you can do. You can contact Roz Grigsby at executive director at tacomaonline.com or call her at 240-253-4229. And there'll be 3 stages. It'll be a fabulous, as it is always every year. I think it's the 28th year this year. Set of concerts and events and activities. So.
Okay. The next item is additional agenda items and a scheduling update. There are no additional agenda items. If I can just point out to folks that next week, September 28th, our work session is intended to be devoted to discussion of legislative priorities and local bills in discussion with our legislative advocate, aka lobbyist, and a report from the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee and discussion of the Program Year 36 CDBG program recommendations. The following night, Tuesday the 29th, is the nominating caucus at 7:30 in this room, the Azalea Room. I wanted to point out that on Thursday, October 15th, the city will be, I guess I would say the city will be hosting, except we're not going to host it in this building, we're going to host it at Montgomery College, a meeting of the Maryland Municipal League Montgomery County chapter with Senator Ben Cardin. And on October 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, most of the members of the council will be at Rocky Gap attending the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Conference. Monday, October 26th, a tentative work session item is the Police Department status report on the license plate scanner usage, and we might consider adding a little bit of additional subject matter to that discussion with the police department to cover any of the questions that Councilmember Wright brought up in his comments about the speed cameras. And that takes us to the end of October, and beyond that, we won't go until we know what's happened from the election on November 3rd. So we will move on to the public comment period. If anybody has any comments they'd like to make on any item that is not on our special session, therefore any item that isn't on the work session agenda or anything that isn't mentioned anywhere here. And if you can please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Larry Silverman. I live on Birch Avenue, and I'm the owner of S&A Beads. 6 or 8 weeks ago, I came here to talk about the inventory tax. Tacoma Park, unlike most other communities in Montgomery and Prince George's County, imposes a tax on inventories of the store, which is very burdensome. Well, I'm back, and I brought reinforcements. My army, and I'd like to defer to my army in the form of Roz Grigsby, and then I'd like to use the balance of my time after she's done. Thank you.
I'm Roz Grigsby. I'm Executive Director of the Old Tacoma Business Association. Last week I was asked to make a presentation at the Maryland Downtown Development Association meetings, quarterly meetings in Denton. And when I floated the question or the puzzle of personal property tax assessments, it seemed like everybody in the room kind of went, yeah, we don't do that. You know, so that kicked me back to the Main Street Maryland site, because I wanted to look at how many Main Street communities designated by the state of Maryland use personal property tax assessment as a tool, or how many offer a exemption to spur economic development. So the Main Street Maryland, which comes out of the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, specifies their purpose as strengthening the economic potential of Maryland's traditional main streets and neighborhoods. Of course, Tacoma Park is the only so designated community in all of Montgomery County, and there are none in Prince George's County. When I looked through the numbers, there are 23 Main Street Maryland communities plus 9 in the city of Baltimore. So out of the 32 communities, 29 offer 100% exemption from the personal property tax assessments to local businesses. The Middleton offers a 40% exemption. Salisbury offers a 55% exemption on the commercial inventory and 100% on the manufacturing and R&D inventory, which leaves Tacoma Park as the only member of this community working on economic development in traditional neighborhoods and historic communities that doesn't use this as a tool to spur economic development further. I know the council's looked at this a little bit, and city staff has given you some information on it. It's important to remember that though the only municipalities that offer an exemption in Montgomery County are Gaithersburg, which has 100%, and I'll speed it up, Rockville, which has 82%, unincorporated areas do not levy that additional tax. So Silver Spring, for instance, is a much more hospitable climate to do business in this regard than Tacoma Park, and I think we can do better than that. When I did my presentation at the MDDA meeting, a question came up at the end saying, you're from Tacoma Park, this progressive community. What kind of policies does Tacoma Park, what kind of progressive policies does Tacoma Park have to support local businesses? And I looked at Erwin Mack, and Erwin looked at me, and we kind of didn't have a great progressive, you know, nuclear-free, no trade in Burma kind of an answer for Tacoma Park. And I think this idea of an exemption on the personal property tax assessment is a tool that we can use that would make a huge difference for our local businesses. It can be very burdensome as it now stands. So I encourage you to consider this. We know this is a long-term discussion. We know this is not this budget year, but we want to open this conversation with council. Thank you.
Thanks for that additional information.
Just to use my additional time, Larry Silverman, again, owner of S&A Beads, I just want to reinforce the idea. This is a very burdensome tax. Our customers want us to have a big inventory, but if we have a big inventory, we pay you a percentage of that, and it's very hurtful. Of course, you're going to lose money if you stop taxing the small businesses. I want to make a suggestion as how you might recover that money. Under the personal property tax, first of all, you can change the personal property tax on small businesses in Tacoma Park by yourselves. You don't need anybody to say so. But there's another rule that says that although our cash register at S&A Beads or Now and Then or any of the little stores, our cash register is taxed. The cash registers in the banks are not taxed. They're exempt from this. Our shelving is taxed, but their vaults are not taxed. So I think now that, to change that will require an act of the legislature, but I would hope when you talk to your government relations people, you encourage them to at least work to change that here. I think in general, the banks have been a disappointment in terms of business development, and I think the city sort of has been too. I'm very glad that you're redoing your council chambers and you're putting solar roofs there, but I think there should be solar roofs in the Old Town section of town too. And I think that's not going to happen unless we have an activist city council. So you just have to think about yourself. Are you the kind of people that say, yes, tax the inventory and equipment of small businesses, which are in this economy are really struggling, and whose loss would be felt by every resident of Tacoma Park? We believe in taxing the inventory and equipment of small businesses, but we want to exempt the Bank of America and SunTrust. Is that your political view? Is that where you're going? Or are you the kind of people that want to say, yeah, we want to have a very modern city hall, but we don't care if our privately owned downtown is energy inefficient? So I hope you'll think about that and do something about it. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And if I can just get a clarification, are the banks exempt from all aspects of that, or just particular ones?
The personal property tax is on equipment and inventory, and they don't really have inventory, but their equipment is exempted. So particularly their computers, the cash registers, any cash register we have, any shelf we have, any storage closet we have is taxed. Now, for us, it's not a big tax. The inventory is a big tax because those things are mostly depreciated. But the banks also have personal property,
Right.
which is worth more than all the stores, and that's not taxed. It's exempt.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Another clarification, if I might.
Yeah.
I hear that some things are depreciated and some things aren't. So
Right.
things that stick around are depreciated.
Yeah.
Things in the inventory that turns is not really depreciated.
Right. The incentive.
You're paying in a sense. And can you tell me,
Yeah.
give me a rough idea, I don't want to pry into your business
Right.
affairs, but if you had, for example, at the time of valuation, $100,000 worth of inventory, what would the tax on that be?
$2,000.
$2,000.
Yeah.
And is that high or low in your particular inventory, your mix of inventory?
That's a number. That $100,000. I won't say what we have, but that's not that's typical. You know, we may be a little lower than that. Somebody might be a little higher than that, but it's not unusual to have that. And I think sometimes the tax is 2.5%. I don't remember who sets the rate, in which case it would be $2,500. But when you're dealing with very difficult margins, and I really wouldn't be here if we weren't in such tough economic times, but when you get to the point where you're really just paying your bills, if you're lucky, and then you impose another tax on top of that, it begins to hurt.
Well, we want to promote things we want and discourage things, and taxing is the one way to discourage things. So that's something for us to keep in mind. How do we want to encourage and discourage things?
Yeah.
Thanks for your comment.
Yes.
Say it.
Yeah, well, we pay a state tax too on the equipment, but not the inventory. It's just the city imposes on the inventory. So it gets to mount up.
Sure.
And again, I think.
You gave us a tough choice back there,
Yeah,
Larry, too.
yeah.
I can't quite remember your wording, but you gave us two options, and both were not very good options. I don't know if anyone else remembers what our two options were. Do we want to be perceived as a city that puts a burden on the small businesses, or do we want to, does anyone else remember the option?
Or do we want to have a nice new council chambers?
Oh, and not about anyone else, yeah.
Yes, I remember. The answer was no in both cases.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I look forward to a new burst of activity and to promote business, because I think the people, from what they tell me when they come in the store, the people love the stores, and I think they want to keep them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Erwin Mack, Executive Director, Tacoma Landing Crossroads. Two comments. One, you should be proud of Roz I'm a member and have been for some years of Maryland Downtown Development Association. When I saw her as a guest speaker, I knew we were in for a good presentation of the city of Tacoma Park. And I had my PSs in there because of the kind of area I represent, which is significantly different from the Main Street program. But with two of us on there, Tacoma Park should be proud of who was on that board for the presentation. Secondly, I have not been made aware of the fact of this reconsideration of the personal property tax, and it does concern me. Having had a business in Tacoma Park for 14 years, I'm well aware of what it takes to support that. I'm also well aware of what's happening to the economic situation, and I definitely want to add my support to what Roz has said, and we would want to join with them in looking with you at how we can avoid overburdening businesses. We are not happy with the empty stores that we have in the Crossroads. In my 25 years there, I've never seen that many square feet vacancy. And this is not a good sign, but we are expecting that eventually it will come back, as the highs and lows always do. But it is a concern, and we'll join Old Town Business Association in standing together on behalf of the city as well as the property owners and businesses.
Mr. Mayor, council members, City Manager Matthews. My name is Bob Griffith. My wife Barbara and I live at 108 Grant Avenue. We have a black and white Labradoodle whom you may have seen us walking around. Some tell us it looks like a Portuguese water dog. I was delighted to hear council members Wright and Robinson talk about a possible working session that would address the needs of dog owners in Tacoma Park. I'm one of a group of dog owners who for years have been gathering early in the morning at Ed Wilhelm Park to let our dogs play off leash. It's a very sociable activity, both for the dogs and their owners. And both the dogs and the owners are pretty well behaved. The dogs, for the most part, are kept under voice command and near their owners. Their poop is scooped. And the owners frequently police the grounds, picking up trash and returning soccer balls and cleats and basketballs to a location near the school. I bring with me a petition signed by almost 30 dog owners asking that the city join us in creating an appropriate time and space where we can walk our dogs off leash. Modest effort that we propose, and I know the issues are very complicated, but I hope the council will give them some thought and see if we can find our way to a solution. One of the wonderful things about Tacoma Park, I think, is our sense of community, and this is a really lovely small community that I've been lucky to participate in for the past several years, and we hope that the city will join us in fostering this small community of early morning dog walkers. So I have a petition with 30 signatures, but I also am here on behalf of Chester, Murphy, Yoko, Fayette, Sadie, Pompey, Blue, Beauregard, and all the other dogs that frolic up on Wilhelm Park early in the morning.
Thank you. We'll be glad to work with dog owners and try and come up with a good solution. Is there anybody else who'd like to make any comments?
On another matter, I have a quick announcement to invite everyone to the Tacoma Park Antique and Classic Car Show this Sunday on Laurel Avenue from 3 to 6. Bring your classic car, anything 25 years and older. I know there's some real gems in town that are much older than that. Should be a nice event.
Darn, my oldest is only 21. Thanks for that reminder. Is there anybody else? Okay, then we'll move along to the city manager's comments.
Just a couple items this evening. It must be the evening for dogs, because I wanted to let the council know that the city clerk's office earlier today did receive a petition to establish a dog park at Spring Park. So staff will be reviewing that. Also wanted to let the council just know that staff is working on putting together the application for the city's participation in the local government infrastructure loan program. This is the mechanism that we have used in the past to obtain bonds for capital projects. The application does not bind the city council to anything. It's just an October 1st deadline so that the state has an idea of which jurisdictions may be interested in participating. A two-reading ordinance would need to be approved by the council to actually proceed with the actual sale of bonds. So we are working on that over the next few weeks. There's also been some discussion this evening about speed cameras. Just wanted to share with the council, there's obviously been some changes in state law since we put together the speed camera budget. And at the time we put together the budget, actually the program had just started, I think, about 3 days before I handed the council a budget. So next week I hope to have a written update for the council on what that fund actually looks like. I think we will be recommending some changes to the projected revenues and expenditures for the speed camera fund. The other item I don't believe I've shared with the council is, as we expected, Montgomery County had basically indicated that they did want to assess a fee for basically processing the fines that were being remitted to the city. They didn't give us very much notice. They actually gave us a proposal about 30 days before they were going to start imposing the fee. The fee was going to be a processing fee of $2 per citation. The chief and I talked about it. We did not think that seemed particularly reasonable. So we did explore some other options, including with our current vendor, ACS, which is the company that we have partnered with for installing the cameras. The chief took the lead on that on behalf of many of the municipal jurisdictions, and we're able to secure a rate of 25 cents per citation. So we will be doing an administrative amendment to the contract that the council had approved with ACS, and that will go into effect October 1st.
And so that's with ACS, not with the county?
That's correct. Actually, I think we were one of the lead jurisdictions, and I don't believe there's any municipalities that intend to stay with the county for that service, as far as I know. Is that correct, Chief? Yeah.
Can I get a clarification on the speed camera? Was it 10 miles over and then went to 11 miles over, or was it 11 miles over and went to 12 miles over?
10 is going to 12 October 1st.
October 1st. Okay, thank you.
Right, and that's one of the issues, I think, in terms of looking at what we budgeted is, not surprisingly, we do expect that there will be some fall off in the number of citations with that change in the speed limit that constitutes a violation. So, that's it, unless there's questions about anything.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing on the New Hampshire Gardens traffic calming plan, and I see that we have a number of people who have signed up to testify at the public hearing, so I'll go through those names, and if you can please keep your comments to 3 minutes on the testimony on the public hearing. And Chris Victoria is first, followed by Michael Turner and Eric Mendoza.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Victoria. I'm current president of the New Hampshire Garden Citizens Association. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed traffic ordinance or traffic bill for the New Hampshire Gardens neighborhood. Just to recap what has happened to date, and I think I see Alana Blanchard is here tonight. She can fill in the blanks for me if I leave anything important out. But this has been an ongoing process, a long-term process. It's been underway for approximately 2 years, I would say. And a number of public meetings have been held, both by the neighborhood association and convened directly by the city. There's been strong support, I think, for what's being proposed in this ordinance, and I would this traffic studies was done to identify that there was definitely a speeding and cut-through traffic problem in our neighborhood. That's been empirically demonstrated by the traffic study the city paid for. There's been, as I said, a number of meetings to discuss the various options. I think Alana has actually done localized polling of people that are going to be directly impacted by where the structures are currently conceptually proposed, and pretty uniform, well, I wouldn't say uniform support, but strong support for traffic calming. And I would just add that, while it's been identified, that we do currently have a problem, given the good things that are happening up at the corner at the Tacoma Langley Crossroads and the proposed increases in density and development and just sort of the general plan for revitalizing that area and bringing more traffic to it, I don't see this problem going away with that increase in development. So I would respectfully request that you please pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Turner.
I'm a resident living on Lockney, and my kids ride school buses, and I drive a school bus, and school bus drivers in general don't like speed bumps. However, sometimes there's no other alternative if you want to calm down the traffic, as it were. My only concern is that the speed bumps be such that we can cope with them in the school buses. Your average speed bump, maybe 15, we rated to go over them at 15 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour, whatever. A typical school bus, such as a special education bus or whatever, has to slow 5 miles per hour below that in order to get over the speed bump without risking injury or unduly shaking up the kids. And so I'm hoping that the speed bumps specifications will be such that we can slow down to 15 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour and get over the speed bump all right and not have the situation like it is on Ritchie. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that the city does have a standard for speed humps that is different than many of the speed humps in the city and not as aggressive as many of those are, and so that all new speed humps that go in do meet that new standard. Eric Mendoza. Okay, Ron Flowers, followed by Erwin Mack and Leon Brunson.
Yes, good evening. I'm Ron Flowers, longtime resident of Tacoma Park. Live at 1215 Kirkland Avenue, where the proposed circle is designed for Kirkland and Kennewick. I want to say right off that I support traffic calming, and that particular intersection is known for incoming, particularly cars, buzzing around that corner. My property is directly impacted by the design, and I have looked at it, shared it with members of my family, and our landscape is about to change out our front window quite drastically. Could be for a good thing, actually, with the way that the fence across the way deteriorates from time to time. But I have several concerns I'd just like to mention quickly. We have a lot of foot traffic in that area. People passing not only down to Kennewick from the business center over near New Hampshire Avenue, but also down Kirkland. On the Kennewick side, we have a short bit of sidewalk. On the Kirkland side, we have no sidewalk. And I'm not sure how this design is intended to manage the foot traffic, but I would hope that it would not send the foot traffic out into the semicircle. I think that would be very dangerous. We have a lot of mothers with small children going through there. On the other hand, I would hope that it would not send the traffic up on my lawn. And I can see that we're going to have a semicircle of pedestrian traffic somewhere there. And so my question is, do we have any plans here to install some piece of sidewalk that would be in that bump out that goes out from my property and the 1213 property next to us there on that side? I am concerned also about our utility vehicles and our emergency vehicles being able to get through and to be able to traverse what looks to me like a very complex and complicated design. I am somewhat familiar with the lower end of Wildwood and Glenside, but I don't think this is comparable. I think we have much more traffic here than is down. I could be wrong because I don't live down that way, but I think we have a lot more traffic here and the potential for risk of accident here. A third thing is that it will impact our household, particularly with a decrease in the amount of street parking for visitors. I happen to have a driveway off of Hammond. I guess that's the end of my time.
Go ahead, wrap up.
I have a driveway off of Hammond, so for our personal needs, we're fine. And the final point that I would like to mention is that I'm afraid for the traffic coming in the one-way street, which is Hammond, on the right side. It's not listed there as Hammond, but that is a one-way street going toward Kennewick. And it is constantly violated now, and I have a fear that it may be violated more by the blockage of traffic trying to get through. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Erwin Mack, followed by Leon Brunson and Liz Moses.
Mayor, City Council, Manager, Erwin Mack, Conalangli Crossroads. My comments are restricted to the traffic circle that's implied to be installed at the corner of Kennewick, not the others, even though we support traffic calming. My biggest disappointment is to look at the blue introductory sheet and not find the action that was taken by the CDA board months ago in support of a traffic circle. And every month when your representative meets with our board, our question has been, when are you going to install this traffic circle? So I'm disappointed that that letter got lost someplace because it was definitely sent to the city, and I'd like to have that added to the support of it. The other concerns I have about that specific location, of course, is that we have significant amount of potential commercial traffic that's going to come in off of New Hampshire to head around to some of the stores. And the traffic circle needs to be designed with that in mind, not necessarily to favor them, but to at least allow such traffic as is legal to go in there. Another factor that comes into play is this matter of the speed bumps or speed humps. Most of you may know that I have been asked by Mr. Leggett to chair the Montgomery County Pedestrian Traffic Safety Advisory Committee for a 2-year period. We have a subcommittee that's studying this matter of humps and bumps in Montgomery County because Montgomery County literally has more of those than any other county in the United States. That's not an enviable record. And so we have to give advice to the county executive and to the county council, and our subcommittee has been charged to come back with some kind of a report as to how is this wise, how is it affecting emergency vehicles, as we all know, and residents and so on. So you have a right as a municipality to do as you wish, but the county will be hearing from the subcommittee to the main committee to ultimately to the council, to the executive, sorry, and the county council, and I'll be glad to share whatever information comes from that. The subcommittee may decide that there's nothing to be done, it's okay as it is, or may recommend a reduction or change in style. But there is a concern about the increased number of speed bumps and speed humps. And as a matter of bit humor, the word hump is becoming a questionable use on signage because students are stealing the signs and putting them in their dormitory rooms or their own rooms. So the question is, what will we be identifying other than speed bumps perhaps in the future?
Thank you. Leon Brunson.
Good afternoon. Leon Brunson. I live on the corner of Lockney and Ann. I want to address another issue rather than speed bumps or the traffic itself. The matter has already been brought up about the school bus coming there. On the corner of Lockney and Ann, every morning, there are 4 buses that comes in through there. The additional problem is that parents bring their children there in their cars, and cars are lined up on all 4 directions. Now, Friday evening, the ice cream man brought his truck up there at the corner, right there at the stop sign, and was selling ice cream there. And I started to call the police, because all those kids and parents and cars there, somebody's going to get hurt. Some of those children, these are small children going to the elementary school. Some of them can barely walk. Then there are kids playing with their bicycles, running all up and down the sidewalk. And so that's an issue we have to also consider when we talk about putting speed bumps and whether you're going to place them. And motorists violating the traffic rules by parking their cars right there on the corner at the intersection, right there at the stop sign. So I want to emphasize that fact, that unless we put those speed bumps and place them properly, there's going to be some kids hurt or injured or maybe killed. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Moses, followed by Elizabeth Kozel and Kevin Charles.
Hi, I'm Liz Moses. I live on Merwood Drive, and I'm here to voice my support also for the traffic plan. I'm here representing myself, but also my husband, my 3 children, and to continue the theme for the evening, my dog. Because Wildwood doesn't have sidewalks going from essentially where it connects to New Hampshire all the way up to Carroll, if you want to walk with your children to Crossroads or walk your dog around in the morning and the evening, you are walking in the middle of the street. In addition, because so many of the homes in our neighborhood don't have driveways, most of the street parking, most of the parking happens on the street. So you really are walking either on somebody's yard, or if you have a stroller like I do with my toddler, you're walking in the middle of the street. So when this cut-through traffic comes zooming down Wildwood, or that one little part of Glenside by Becca Lilly, you really are putting a lot of people at risk, children, people walking their dogs. My toddler, I do my best to keep control of him, but by definition, he doesn't listen because he's a toddler. So that is a very big concern of me and mine and my family, and the reason that I really support this traffic plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Kozel, followed by Kevin Charles and Fred Schultz.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Kozel. I live in the 7800 block of Wildwood Drive, as 3 generations of Kozels have done since original construction in 1951. I pay taxes to this city on both the east and the west side of the Kozel compound, where my parents' home is on the west side, and my daughter and I share the home on the east. So I don't think there's anyone in here, perhaps Mr. Flowers, I don't remember how long he's lived on the corner, that is more familiar with the cut-through traffic situation on Wildwood Drive. And I would certainly support, and have done since 1993 at least, a curtailment of cut-through traffic. I'm just not convinced that a traffic circle is the means to that end. Since 1993, there's been a plethora of activity, and I do applaud everyone in the association in the last 2 years, and particularly Alona Blanchard, for working on this matter. But recently, I toured the city, our fine city of Tacoma Park, and with the exception of the traffic circle currently in front of Bright Light Baptist Church at Wildwood and Glenside, and the 2 on Lockney, one at the intersection of Lockney and Hammond, and the other Lockney and Kennewick, I could only find one other traffic circle in the city. It's at the intersection of Elm and Lincoln, just inside of Ethan Allen. So I had to wonder why there is this strong move to add to the existing 3 traffic circles, 3 more, at an expense of at least $25,000 each. And I listen and appreciate the concerns of Mr. Mack and Mr. Flowers, and I share them. This is a whopping expense in hard economic times. I'd almost rather give that money to the people in Old Town to pay their inventory tax. Almost. I'm sorely disappointed that as an original customer by foot to the Safeway in 3 weeks' time, I can't go there anymore. It hurts me that business is suffering in our city. And I don't know how traffic's going to increase if there's no business for people to go to and from. When you look at the map, and I hope everyone in this room has a map, of the configuration of the New Hampshire Garden Citizens Association, we are bounded by Carroll Avenue, University, New Hampshire, and Long Branch Creek. If you look at Wildwood Drive, it is the made-to-order cut-through from Maryland Route 650. And it always has been, and I'm 56 years old. I don't think traffic circles are the way to do it. I'm not convinced. I have not seen any reports, any data relative to the effectiveness of the one at Glenside, and I think that's an important thing to see before we invest time and effort and money, hard-earned, tight money, to do more of the same.
Thank you. Kevin Charles, Fred Schultz, and Barry Howard.
Hi, my name's Kevin Charles. I live on Cole Avenue in the New Hampshire Garden side. I've been living there for almost 20 years now. The gentleman who spoke before me talked about the kids who played on Lockney Avenue. I was one of those kids. That's been my bus stop for 20 years before I went to the University of Maryland. We don't have sidewalks. And I totally agree that traffic circles, I don't see how they work, because even at the University of Maryland, it gives the false assurance that that's a pedestrian haven. People cross and wait. I'm pretty sure Mr. Irwin Mack knows that in Langley Park, the medians, people cross and then they just stand there. So they put up a fence. Now they have a fence on all the medians. If you put more traffic circles, it's not going to do anything. It honestly is not. We have so many speed bumps, as Mr. Mack proposed, and I don't think that we should waste our money on speed bumps or traffic circles, because I think the bumps on the road and the tar that they put down every summer is just as good, because I mean, I think we should repave our roads first, because my street itself, Cole Avenue, has so many cracks, so many bumps, potholes. Why can't we fix that first? So I think we should have some more sidewalks. I think that's the issue here. That's it.
Thank you. Fred Schultz, and the last one signed up is Barry Howard.
Hi, my name is Fred Schultz. I live at 7311 Wildwood Drive in this area. I'm here tonight with my wife, Nancy Schultz. We've lived there 23 years and with various dogs over the years. We have definitely witnessed the problems that various people here have identified on Wildwood Drive as being a serious cut-through. When the New Hampshire Avenue University Boulevard intersection was undergoing major repairs in the past year, we saw an increase in cut-through traffic. So that really brought it to our fore, and I think a lot of commuters found out and said, oh gosh, here's a neat way to get around, and so it's just, it was a learning device. First, I want to say that I'm in support of the plan. I think that speed bumps and circles will help, but I'd also like to sort of second what Elizabeth Cosell was just saying, is that in a different way, and that is I'm not sure that that's going to be sufficient to Alona Blanchard's credit, who did a good job in presenting this whole matter and putting up with a lot of grief. There's a lot of other ideas considered. Signage to prevent people from making certain turns at certain times of the day, and questions about the enforceability of all these things, and bump outs and other kinds of things. And so those things shouldn't be taken off the table. I think they need to be deferred until we see how this new installation of circles and speed bumps works. I'm not convinced that this will necessarily solve the speeding problems on Wildwood Drive and on Glenside. I do think it's a step in the right direction, and therefore I do support it, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Barry Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, Alona Blanchard. Other staff that worked very hard to help our neighborhood develop a management program for the traffic calming. Before I leave here tonight, I'd like you to consider 3 points, and one that as my neighbor Liz pointed out, that these are tough economic times for the city and taxpayers, and I think that some of these solutions that have been put on the table are untenable at this moment. It was my understanding there was $100,000 2 years ago allocated to be shared between 3 neighborhoods. So if that was fairly equally shared, then that would have been $33,000 for New Hampshire Gardens. I think during my fact finding during that time, one traffic circle could be as much as $44,000. So I don't think we need to sink that kind of cash into these measures. I think that a point that Mr. Schultz brought up is that there was construction on New Hampshire Avenue, and that has subsided at this point in time since New Hampshire has been reopened. There has been less traffic. I live right on Wildwood at the corner, near the corner of Jackson, and witness the flow-through traffic on a daily basis. So I would advocate for smaller measures. And then the benefits of, through the process, the benefits of the measures that are on the table right now have been not thoroughly articulated to the community. Just to illustrate one point, we have a group account on Yahoo Groups for the neighborhood, but there's only 62 people on that list. There are 393 single-family homes, I believe, within our neighborhood. And there's, across the way, there's well, I don't want to go into Ward 6. That's beyond the scope here. So that there's not full representation. I myself, during the sector plan, some of the sector plan deliberations have gone door to door and passed out copies to people, and I realize that there's a digital divide, so you're not reaching all the people if you're trying to reach them digitally. But the traffic circles, there's points about them, aesthetic points, and I would argue against that. There's a great deal of weeds that are growing up over the Glenside and Wildwood traffic circle at the moment. I think that there are other options like the speed bumps and $300 stop signs to create four-way stops, such as Kingwood and Wildwood, that would be more economical and perhaps more bang for our buck. And then finally, there was a process that was conducted that was under the name of the Citizens Association, but not everyone, as I pointed out, using electronic email or electronic mail and group lists to distribute information. I don't believe that the community at large is represented by the plan, and it matches very closely to the proposal that's on the table. So the 6 options that are on the table are actually in that plan, but that was not developed in a community-wide way. So I think perhaps we should consider other options at the moment, in all fairness. So I thank you for your time tonight, and you have a copy of my written testimony, and I look forward to your further deliberations and decision-making to move forward in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who did not sign up who has not spoken who would like to testify? Okay, then we will close the public hearing, and we will move on to our special session, and the first item in that special session is a first reading ordinance authorizing installation of the New Hampshire Gardens traffic calming measures. And Alona Blanchard is at the table, and would you like to make any comments or any introduction on that?
Good evening. I'll keep this short. Essentially, I'm just going to go over the proposal. There was an extensive process to develop this plan, which included several neighborhood-wide mailings to all of the residences in the neighborhood, and including both advertising meetings, but also requesting comments, and several of them were in English and in Spanish. The neighborhood held several meetings and was successful in developing a plan which was forwarded to the council for consideration. And so this is the plan that's included in the bill, in the ordinance, and that is on the table before you. And so that plan includes construction of a traffic circle at Kennewick and Kirkland Avenues, and that's a larger style traffic circle as opposed to a mini circle, but much smaller than the type of traffic circle that would be on the campus of Maryland. So it's more of a neighborhood style. And it's used to reduce the width of very wide intersections and so that cars go through the intersections much slower than they currently do, but that they don't stop, so they're considered more environmentally sustainable because you're not braking and then accelerating the way you would at a stop sign. The construction of mini traffic circles on Wildwood Drive at Kirkland Avenue and at Kingwood Drive. These are smaller circles that are mainly to create what's called a horizontal shift, so that a car moves, does not have a straight through at an intersection, but it needs to make a shift to the right. The installation of a speed bump on Wildwood Drive and Lockney Avenue between Kirkland Avenue and Ann Street. I'd like to clarify that the speed bump that's currently in the bill, in the ordinance, is a standard city-style speed bump, which is the raise, lower, it has an indentation, as opposed to, and that is a 5-mile-an-hour speed bump, as opposed to the Montgomery County standard, which is a rise and then a lower, which is a 15 to 20-mile-an-hour speed hump. So it's the difference between bumps and humps. And I was sitting next to the Director of Public Works, and she said we have not had any signs stolen in the city, and we have both styles. So, but
bingo, there it went.
Well, we were thinking it could be the quality of the students. Yes. Further is the construction of a raised intersection at Glenside and Merwood Drives. That's at the entrance to the Becca Lilly Park playground area, and slight design improvements to existing traffic circles, which would be such as signage, possibly minor geometric changes, but mainly just signage to make it clearer. And that concludes my presentation.
And I'm not sure whether you covered it, but I didn't hear it. Mr. Flowers' question about sidewalk at Kirkland and Kennewick.
Sidewalks were discussed at some of the meetings, and the letter from the New Hampshire Garden Citizens Association did express support for sidewalks, and we investigated some of the streets that would be good for sidewalks, and we noted, and that was included as a good location for a sidewalk. The speed camera funds, a certain portion of the speed camera funds have been identified for sidewalks, but I believe that'll be a separate project that will come under discussion by the council at a future date.
And I didn't know if Councilmember Victoria wanted to.
Oh, I have a lot of comments.
Okay.
I just want to reiterate the public input phase. When specifically did this start? I know it's been about a couple years.
The initial traffic calming study was presented at the, I'm sorry, it would have been in 2007.
Yes.
So since then, I believe that this neighborhood initially met at the beginning of 2008 to begin to talk about the recommendations, the numbers in the study, and so forth. And
but again, It has appeared in the city newsletter, which goes to every household. We have had separate mailings. We did a mailing of the survey that you constructed, which had visual depictions of this to every household in New Hampshire Gardens.
Questionnaire.
Why is it not a survey?
Because surveys go through a much more extensive testing period.
Oh, that's baloney. I'm a survey researcher and I've done it for 20 years, but whatever the government accepted definition is. I have comments on all the public comment we got. Should I do that now, or is this just questions for Alana?
Let me just see if we got any more questions from Ms. Blanchard. Councilmember Seaman?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on one of the questions from the community, and that was concern about emergency vehicles getting through the intersection with the circle there.
When we design circles, we look at the turning radiuses of both standard vehicles and larger vehicles such as school buses. For larger emergency vehicles than standard vehicles, we generally use a roll curb with the assumption that an emergency vehicle doesn't really look at curbs as an obstacle the same way but a bus does. A bus needs to use that roadway generally at least twice a day, and sometimes more than that. So in the past, we've had those vehicles, not only have we looked at it in planned one, but we've also had those vehicles drive out and test going around the circle before it's installed. So we do it.
Do we have the fire department sign off on our designs?
We've actually had the fire department drive their truck out and drive around. We've been lucky in that our fire trucks have been, because our streets are small to begin with, we tend to have more flexible fire trucks than other jurisdictions may. But they do, they've driven around not just traffic circles, but when we narrow a street, we also like to have them come out and test to make sure that they'll be able to navigate it.
Okay. And I assume that will be done
Yes.
in this case, too? Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
On the speed bumps, humps issue, has there been any consideration to using the design suggested by some traffic consultants instead of having a solid hump bump across the width or most of the width, that you have two cutouts the width of large vehicles? That is, so that the cutouts are larger than a car, so a car couldn't use those, standard axle, but are the width of an emergency vehicle so that they can go through it faster.
It wasn't something that was specifically discussed with this project or as requested by the community. However, I believe that the ordinance gives you the city engineer the flexibility to use that, and I believe that's something that is being looked at. I know that I've seen some emails about it, so it may be something that is being looked at. But I believe that there is the flexibility that that could be considered.
Sure. The city engineer has done some evaluation. We had not at any point to make a recommendation. There's concerns about car safety because we do think cars will take the most advantageous route, and even though the spaces are not cut for a car will swerve into another's drive lane in order to get one set of wheels through the bump. So we've taken a look at what's been done in other parts of the country, both with an eye to bicycle safety, which I know is an issue that's come up before, as well as the speed bump and the car and the emergency vehicles. And so far we haven't found conclusive evidence that there's a better way out there. But the city engineer has not rendered a decision or made a recommendation at this point. We're still in kind of an exploratory phase.
Right, and the same thing, I was going to ask a follow-up question about bicycle safety, but you already raised it.
Yeah, I mean, there is
there are other designs that other places use that may be better.
Yeah. At this point, the gutter pan is the accessible place for bikes, which is not ideal in a parking situation if cars park over the speed humps. And we have seen some angled cuts through the speed hump as a way to keep the cars from driving through it, but enable a bicycle to. But you'd have to be a pretty agile biker to take the
to take the angle. So it's a bit of a mixed story.
So I just want to clarify, where is this money coming from to do this work?
The funding source is the Speed Camera Fund.
And could we use that to reimburse the business owners of their personal property tax and inventory?
No, you could not.
Oh, we can't, okay, I just wanted to clarify that. But we could use that for, although we've set a threshold that $100,000 supposed to be used for traffic calming and another pot for sidewalks, we could, if we wanted to, use this money for sidewalks, right? There's nothing in the speed camera money that says we have to designate it to certain pots. There's just a category of types of things we can do, right? And sidewalks fall into that, or do they?
Right, that's correct. The language in state law is somewhat vague. It refers to public safety purposes, but it's fairly clear that it's intended for things such as traffic calming, sidewalks. It could be used to pay for some actual police salaries as long as the activities that they are engaged in is either the direct administration and implementation of the program or, for instance, speed enforcement activities. Just as I've been working up some financial projections, which I'm going to give you next week, I would just remind the council that when we actually put together the budget, as I mentioned earlier, we had just actually started the program. It was basically days old. So when we did the budget and included $500,000 for sidewalk design and installation and $100,000 for traffic calming, we did so knowing that we weren't really expending the whole pot of money that we thought we would have. Based on the calculations that we're still in the process of refining, I think there are sufficient funds if the council wanted to leave the $500,000 for sidewalks and actually allocate additional monies to traffic calming projects.
Okay. And then I had a question about, normally when we put in speed bumps, there's like a process where a certain number of people have to sign on a street. Did we do that here, or did we use this other process where we did outreach to the residents?
The traffic calming ordinance, if there's a request that's generated from the citizens, then generally it's through a petition process. When we began this process, it was specifically for neighborhoods where a more comprehensive study was needed in order to develop a proposal. So at that time, we opened it up to the whole city, asking neighborhoods to apply to be within this program. So in the past, generally, a traffic calming proposal can be either generated by a petition or by a request from a council member. So in the case of this program, while the study was generated through the application, the actual proposal is generally brought to the council by the specific council member.
Great. And when you say the standard city speed bump, is that like the speed bump that's on Maple Ave, the speed bumps that are on Maple Avenue between Tulip and Philadelphia, or is that a different speed bump?
It's not that was a expanded city standard. The city standard is generally a 3.5 to 4 inch high hump on top of a bump on top of a hump. I think the ones most recently installed that people can point to are those on recently replaced on Westmoreland Avenue. Trying to think of where we put in Hickory Avenue was the first set of the city standards. Yeah. Sligo Creek Parkway is where you could see examples of the county. Oh yeah, Fourth Avenue has a combination of both raised crosswalks as well as speed humps.
If I can just say that the speed humps on Maple Avenue had a special history, and the special exception was made by the council, and after they went in, council members who grudgingly said yes vowed never again.
Right. Well, I just wanted to be sure that anyone who, I know Maple Avenue is a commonly traveled street, that no one was under the misperception that that was the type of speed bump we were talking about. And then my last thing, two final things. One is I agree with Councilmember Snipper that we need to solve the bicycle speed bump problem. And it keeps coming up, and I keep hearing we're thinking about it, but I'd like to try and get some closure on it. In Santa Fe, I actually experienced one of those ones that was at an angle, and I'm not the best bicycle rider, so I'm a kind of a large person. So it was actually pretty easy. It was at an angle. It's smaller, narrower than a car tire, but you know, plenty of space for a bike tire. And the drainage pan, or whatever you want to call it, is a real problem, because that's also where trash or garbage collects, and so that's where you get glass. They're often actually very steep at that point. Sometimes they're like right next to a drain, and you get where your bike might actually slide down into the. So I really think we need to solve that issue, and I don't think it's that complex. I know it, you know, might not be ideal for cars, but I think we have to solve that issue. And lastly, I would just say I would defer to Councilmember Victoria's opinion on this, because it's closer in her neighborhood, it's her ward, and she knows what the residents want and have the closest connection. So whatever she will vote for, I would vote for also.
Councilmember Smith, you had one more question.
One more question, which I forgot to ask. Can you talk a little bit about our experience with the traffic circles we do have? Because I can think of at least one more than was listed. There's one just right off New Hampshire at...
Elm and Lincoln.
Yeah, there's a couple on Elm.
Elm is a tough one because you go downhill and
Right.
then you go around. What's the feedback been there in that kind of an extreme circumstance?
Yeah, do we have any
There's-
traffic study type stuff?
I think in general, there's concerns on some of them about compliance in terms of making sure that that cars know which side of the circle to enter on. However, in general, cars slow. In general, people's responses have been that the cars are fairly compliant and do slow down significantly more than they had in the past. And that's been the general experience. Certainly we're still looking at them. We don't have that. We have experience with them, but we're still refining them. And one of the issues is that we put them in on very difficult intersections. We don't tend to put them on easy intersections. We put them in newer parts of the city which have giant intersections, very wide roadways, which tend to be more readily used for cut-through because they're so comfortable for drivers to drive on. And so people that use them are possibly less likely to obey signs anyway, so I'm not sure. So anyways, we're still refining some of the entrances to some of them.
Feedback on pedestrian access and crossing on intersections where there are traffic circles?
No one has brought that up as an issue.
Okay.
It hasn't been.
Except at the junction.
Well, that's a
special case. Say again?
Yeah.
Okay. And if I can just add one quick comment before we go back to Councilmember Victoria. I had some concern when I saw the packet for this item about using up all of our budget on this particular area, and was recalling Councilmember Clay's concerns about when we did Pinecrest last fiscal year and said, oh, don't worry, we'll go to a new year, new money. And then if we did this again, in her absence, I could sense her maybe being out there on the internet watching this and going, no, they're doing it again. So I did talk to the city manager, who said that she thought that there was flexibility if Long Branch Sligo comes in with a request this fiscal year to be able to address that as well. And I'm also cognizant of not wanting to burn through all the speed camera money and get to the end and go, gee, we did a few Cadillac projects and we've still got all these other things that we want to do. So I think we have to be aware of that as well. Councilmember Victoria.
Thank you. I wrote down notes for all of the public comments, so I'm going to go through them in turn. The gentleman who drove a bus, a school bus, I was concerned, but we already had a discussion of what type of bumps we were talking about, and I know that there are 2 relatively new bumps on Merwood that I made Public Works come remeasure like 4 times, so I'm pretty sure they're in compliance. And school buses routinely seem to get down without problem, so I think we're okay on that. Mr. Flowers, the sidewalks are a problem. I will say I can't promise that we're getting any in New Hampshire Gardens because there are other people up here representing other neighborhoods who would object before it's discussed by council, but it is coming close on the agenda. It is probably the most common response I seem to get when we talk about anything in our area is, we don't need that, what we need is sidewalks. I completely and totally agree. I think it's going to be a process of bit by bit getting some, and certainly Wildwood is the first priority to have at least one side with a sidewalk from New Hampshire or from Glenside all the way to the crossroads. And hopefully, we are just starting the process of looking at places, but given that Hammond curves around and is actually the way that if you were walking from most of the neighborhood, you would walk to the crossroads. And we have a large strip on the back of a commercial building that would be relatively problem-free to get paved. That's a possibility. And I think we should also look at how this circle interacts at the one at Kirkland and, what's my other K Street? Kirkland and Kennewick. Now, I will give some feedback because the circle at Glenside and Wildwood, I regularly walk as a pedestrian across that one, and sometimes after dark, sometimes at dusk with my dog, because that's my night route. And it's hazardous, but it's not any more hazardous than it was before it went in. It was an acre of asphalt, and I did have the situation where you're halfway across the intersection and a car is flying because there was so much asphalt. Then you just had to hustle to the curb and hope you got there before the car got you. And it's not a whole lot better now without sidewalks because there are some large overgrown plants. There's a blind side if you're doing what I am, which is usually going Wildwood to Glenside. And there's not a place, but that goes to the overall need for a sidewalk on Wildwood. But the comments on Kirkland and Kennewick are a good point. I'm sure there are quite a few people going in various directions at that circle, and that should be incorporated into our sidewalk discussions. The drivable curb we also went over, and it has been okayed by the fire department. We have not had any complaints, I don't believe, about the Glenside and Wildwood site, which is where emergency vehicles typically come in for calls since it's been in, because they can drive on the curb. It's designed for that. Mr. Mack mentioned business access, but my understanding is that the Kirkland and Kennewick Circle is past all the current business entrances. It's beyond Hammond, so I'm not sure it should be affecting.
They go around behind to get to Ann sometimes.
That's not where this circle is, though. It doesn't feed on Ann.
Coming in off New Hampshire.
Oh, New Hampshire to Ann and coming around? I think, I don't know. I'll have to look at that. And secondly, now that everybody's going to titter when we say humps, I simply recommend topos, which is what is on every sign in Mexico. And they have killers. They have bumps that'll jar your teeth out. But topos is cute.
Topes.
Topes?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's why my children are taking Spanish and I'm a piker.
And I prefer the signs in India, which are sleeping policemen.
Well, that is the concern. I'm appreciative of people bringing up cost concerns. This is not an inexpensive venture. However, as we pointed out, this is money that we can use for very limited things. It's not general fund money. It is for traffic calming and safety and sidewalks. And certainly there is a lot of traffic. We had a written comment today that was not from someone here that wants a listing of how many fatalities and injuries we've had before we can justify this. And quite honestly, if I have to show you the bloody body of a child, that's what I'm trying to avoid here. As far as more sidewalks, we went over that. We have had a long public process for this that has tried to contact people in as many ways as I know how. And we have had limited response, but there has been ample opportunity in the last 2 years for people to participate. And my problem with stop signs, I mean, there is a great deal of evidence that circles work in calming traffic. It's both visually and by narrowing the roadway, you slow people down. Piney Branch was a 4-lane road when I came here, and I flew down. Everybody flew down it, and it has been, and that's a state highway, and it has been helped greatly by narrowing the roadway and just getting people visually to not think they have all this room as if they're on a large highway. And Wildwood is fairly wide on some blocks where people don't park on the street or there's not a lot of parking. It's a big open place where you think you can run around the traffic. Stop signs do help, but the problem I see with them is that they are passive, and while they might not cost much to install, what happens is everybody calls up Chief Ron over there, Chief Rakucci, and says, people are running the stop sign, and then we have a detail. And we have details every week or every month in our neighborhood where people write tickets on those. That's a cost. That's a staff cost that will go on forever and only works when there's a policeman parked there. 12 years or so ago, the Neighborhood Association went through a traffic study when I hadn't been living in the neighborhood that long, but when we moved in, there were virtually no stop signs in this neighborhood. There were none at the end of Merwood to turn on to Wildwood and Glenside. And Wildwood and Glenside were avenues to go down. They've since put in quite a few signs, in my view, somewhat willy-nilly where they put them and where they didn't. And we know that those signs aren't effective. There hasn't been much talk about Becca Lilly, but I have a grand view down the hill to Becca Lilly. And every single day we sit there and watch people not just refuse to stop, but not tap their brakes and actually accelerate through an intersection where people are coming from a blind corner from a playground into the street. I'm losing my voice. And I've got to tell you, there are speed bumps on each side of the hill, and what people do is they slow down to bang over the speed bumps, and then they accelerate through the stop signs at a playground entrance. And, you know, we can have the police there sometime, but there is an ongoing cost to that. And, you know, at some extent, I'm just deeply concerned about the child that runs out into the street there behind the high bushes that are covering it, or the dogs, since everybody has to mention dogs today. And I do believe that these are a first step, as someone, I think Mr. Schultz said. This will not be the end, particularly with the Tacoma-Langley sector plan coming on. There may be other things that happen down the line, but this is a minimum to at least keep people slowing down and more conscious of the fact that people live here. I know that it's had an effect on my driving in other neighborhoods when I go there as well.
Councilmember Victoria, would you like to move the
I do move it.
ordinance before you lose your voice completely?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further council comments? Councilmember Smith.
I just, what I did on my summer vacation kind of comment. I was fortunate enough to spend a week in Ireland just a few weeks ago, and traffic circles are us in Ireland. They have very narrow roads in a lot of places, and they have very speedy drivers everywhere. Just unbelievably speedy drivers. I don't know how they have the nerves of steel to drive down those narrow roads at the speeds they do, but man, it's incredible. And it was clear that the only thing that slowed folks down were the traffic circles, because you simply cannot go around those things at the same speed you're driving on a road. And it was a little unnerving to get used to the idea that every intersection had a traffic circle. But on the other hand, there were no stop signs, there were no traffic lights, and the general flow of traffic is continues. So psychologically, you feel like you're not wasting time sitting at a traffic light when no one is, coming the other way. Or the same thing, you get to a stop sign and there's no other car coming, and yet you have to stop. It feels very frustrating if you do this block after block after block. Whereas the traffic circles, you just naturally slow down. because you have to. And so I'm a real strong supporter of well-designed traffic circles.
Councilmember Wright.
I just wanted to be clear in my comment about the money not being able to be used to support the issue around the inventory taxes. That wasn't in any way suggested I didn't support the local businesses in trying to figure out a way to reduce or remove that tax entirely. It was more just a comment that we can use these funds for very limited purposes, and this is a good example where we can use those funds to produce some good.
Councilmember Victoria.
I'm sorry, there's one thing I forgot too. Admittedly, upkeep on the landscaping of the circles has not been perfect, and I've contacted Public Works about it. I also am going to encourage people to be proactive. I'm going to be trying to get some volunteer gardeners in New Hampshire Gardens to help. They come out quarterly to pull the weeds, and in some quarters they're higher than the plantings. And I'm going to try and get someone other than just me to come out every once in a while and give the gardeners a hand on the maintenance. We are increasing the number of plantings that Public Works has to contend with, but we haven't increased the staff. And it means that maintenance and upkeep isn't being very well done. And for me, part of being a progressive community on these things is, yes, encouraging some plantings and getting rid of some blacktop, but more importantly, getting involved to get, when you see a problem, to help it out. We're a small city and we simply don't have the staff to take care of all these. So I'm going to pull some weeds.
And if we do have a program where a neighborhood association or any other group has volunteered to pull those and do that ongoing maintenance, I don't want sign pollution. On the other hand, it might be good to make note of the fact that, in this case, if it were to be that New Hampshire Garden Citizens Association provides maintenance of it, maybe a nice little low plaque so that it's not kind of traffic sign thing, but that's also a healthy reminder as time goes on and the people in the neighborhood change that this commitment has been made and it will gather interest. And I don't want to prolong the comments on this anymore because we're already running behind, but it's my chance to also note that one other thing that I learned in Lancaster at my conference last week was that the first paved road in the U.S. was Route 30 between Philadelphia and Lancaster, and the engineer in charge of making that happen and coming up with the pavement material was named Mr. McAdam, and that's why it's called Macadam. I think you're going the same way, Councilmember Robinson. I'm not going to recognize you.
Oh, my God.
I want to make sure that there isn't anybody else for public comment on this, and I probably will be tempted not to want to recognize you either, because we've taken comments that we've been going, oh, gee, an hour plus on this already. So, and you got your chance, but anybody else have a comment that they really need to make? Councilmember Robinson.
I'm just, from a stopping at a stop sign perspective or a moving through an intersection perspective, I'm supportive of traffic circles in these instances because it keeps traffic moving even while it's calming it. That's all I have to say.
Okay. I think it's time to vote on the first reading ordinance authorizing installation of the New Hampshire Gardens traffic calming measures. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? It carries unanimously. Thank you all. We will move on to second reading ordinance providing for the 2009 city election. Would somebody like to move that? Do I hear a second? Moved by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Robinson. Is there any discussion by the council? Is there any discussion by the public? It's a second reading ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson. Aye. Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Victoria. Aye. Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. We will move along to agenda item number 4, which is a resolution recognizing and supporting Playdate 2009 in Tacoma Park. And I'd like to recognize Pat Rumbaugh, who spearheaded this effort and who has been sitting here patiently waiting and who has made a number of things possible. And one of the things that the city got was the recognition that we are a Playful City USA, and we received this, I don't know, what do you want to call it, a trophy? A recognition as a Playful City, and we brought that down to show folks tonight. And Councilmember Wright, do you want to inaugurate that playfulness?
Would that be to toss it down here? Down
Oh, I was going to throw it to Pat Rumbaugh.
And I'll pass it to the rec department, who we...
All right.
Okay. And what we need to do this evening is... Yeah. Falling into that.
No break to the cameras.
Those are new cameras.
Those cameras are $3,500 apiece. So we have before us a resolution recognizing and supporting Play Day 2009. I guess, would somebody like to move that? Second? Moved by Councilmember Wright, second by Councilmember Victoria. Would you like to make any comments?
I just brought the banner.
To go up to the microphone?
Yeah. Hi, I brought the banner. Would you like to see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Eric, would you come and just...
Maybe if you kind of head over toward a wall, everybody can see it, and the camera can swivel around and see it. Now, head for a wall and show it sideways. Stand with your backs to there you go.
So this is what we hope to hang out just for a few days in front of the community center. And I didn't, Public Works has our two playful signs.
Okay. And what this would do would be to authorize hanging that for a couple of days and authorize the installation on private property of those two signs. And that way everything can move forward. And the National Play Day is this Saturday. And we have copies of the flyer. And any other council questions on this? Any other public comment?
Well, I had one, I have a
Yes.
question. Will it be possible to have fun during this day? Oh, good. Just checking.
Dogs are welcome.
Oh, good.
On the leash, I think.
Yeah, on the lead.
And then we'll have some fun if things go according to plan, and the council does have a discussion about what we want to do about banners. And so we'll be able to have fun with that, but after September 26th. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously. Thank you, Pat. I think we can do the resolution adopting the debt management policy, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back for the remainder of the meeting. And
Oh, okay, I was here to answer questions.
Oh.
Yvonne Brooks, Director of Finance. Basically, there's a requirement by the state of Maryland now that we must have a debt policy. And we have to submit a copy to the state treasurer by October 1st, 2009, and it's required that it be approved by the city council. So basically, after reviewing several debt policies and the GFOA requirement, I drafted, with the assistance of the city manager, the debt management policy for the council to consider. So if you have any questions, available to answer.
I'll just observe that this does a number of things, and one of the things that I liked was that it gives some guidelines about the level of debt as related to assessed valuation of property within the city, and the direct per capita debt, and talks about how it relates to the population, of course, per capita, and the share of the overlapping debt issued by Montgomery County, and just a number of things that we've had questions in the past about if we did something that would increase the debt, how that would be seen in terms of how people look on those things, both other municipalities and various rating organizations, and I think this is helpful in providing that framework. Councilmember Robinson.
I see after number 12 and then the bullet points, the end of the first paragraph says that the city is prohibited from financing by the use of derivatives. And I've heard in the news that some municipalities and other governmental entities have gotten into real trouble in the past using derivatives and getting into super risky instruments. And so I wonder if you have anything to say about that and how that sentence found its way into this piece of paper and what other thoughts there are about that level of risk.
Basically, it's because of the risk that the statement is in there, and
I mean, I guess where I'm coming from is derivatives are the catchphrase for all the super risky stuff that went on in the past 10 years or what have you. How do you evaluate what's really risky? Because clearly some municipalities didn't think it was so risky and made these investments. I know I'm asking a kind of a general question, but how do you look at the level of risk when you look at investments?
well, with the city, we have to comply as far as investments with the annotated code, which basically limits the type of investments to ensure that they are safe and that the taxpayers' monies are protected.
And that's the annotated code of Maryland.
Yes.
Right. So that I think some of those riskier investments took place in other states that don't have the same code as we have in Maryland.
And what differentiates the annotated code of Maryland from other places? What makes it more attentive to the lower level of risk?
I can only, I guess, speak, Councilmember Robinson, to the state I previously worked in, which I think its state provisions were very similar to Maryland's, where essentially governmental funds could only be invested in things like treasury bonds, CDs, things that were basically collateralized and supported so that they were secure. And I think, right.
Our investment policy is based also on the annotated code requirements.
Of Maryland.
Yes, and we have to submit that to the state of Maryland.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we rely in part on the annotated code of Maryland, as well as other things, the length of the indebtedness, debenture, what are these words? Thank you.
Councilman Orsi.
I would put the 6 bullets on the background information on the cover sheet tonight. Kind of highlight the purpose of this document, and I think it would be helpful for the community to just, if you could just read those 6.
Okay, key provisions of the proposed policy are there should be a balanced relationship between issuing debt and pay-as-you-go financing. The term of debt should not exceed the useful life of assets being acquired by the debt issue. The average maturity of the general obligation bonds should be maintained at or below 20 years. Financing will generally be conducted on a competitive basis. Periodic reviews of all outstanding debt will be undertaken to assess the refinancing opportunities. The city will follow a policy of full disclosure on every financial report and bond prospectus.
Yes, I thank you, and I think, with those 6 bullets, I feel comfortable in supporting this. I thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
I appreciate that we tried to come up with some guidelines on percentage of the assessed valuation of tax, the ratio between total debt and the valuation of the tax, and also the dollar figure for per capita. I was curious if those come from some guidelines that the state issues, or in your, either of your experience, you know, where we came up with those numbers, or thought that those numbers made were the right kind of thresholds that we should try and keep as our target thresholds.
They basically came from the review of several other debt policies, the state of Maryland as well as elsewhere, and also a review of where we are as far as those caps are now.
And did the bill itself or the law itself give any guidance as to what should be in the debt policy or specific recommendations?
Well, they kind of referred us to GFOA's requirements, General Finance Officers Association.
But the bill itself doesn't make any comment?
No, they just tell you the content, the things that need to be addressed in there as far as limits and the type of debt and the things like what's on the blue page.
And is point number 11, I'm just a little concerned. The other places where we have specific numerical values that we're going to try and maintain or caps, we use language like the city will strive or the city will try. In number 11, we actually say the city will maintain its annual tax supported debt service at a level less than 15% decline expenditure budgets for the city general and special reserve funds. So is that part of a state law that we have to have that also? If not, I would suggest maybe we change the language to also say like we will strive or we will try, only because I think it probably doesn't bind us in here, but it does seem a little bit, if we're telling the state we will, that means we're actually going to do it as opposed to seeking to or striving to.
That's fine, there is no requirement.
Okay. I'm also very supportive of the derivatives issue and making sure that that's clearly stated in there.
So is that language change okay with the mover and seconder? I thought we did. We didn't. All right, well then, who wants to move it with that change?
I'll move it. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Wright with that change as proposed by Councilmember Wright. Any further questions? Any public? Where is your elbow?
I'd be elbowing you if I did.
Any public comment on this resolution? Okay. All those in favor of this resolution adopting a debt management policy, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. And we will now take a short break and come back at 9:35 on. I didn't say that.
Boy, we'll go there.
Including the representation of Councilmember Clay over here.
She's having a ball.
Yeah, but don't box her in. And we now are to item number 6, which is the resolution appointing members to the Task Force on Environmental Action. And if I can, let's see, is the list, the item that you provided us, the chart that you provided us, that it'll be referenced by the resolution, or the names will go in, or how does that work?
I did this for council's benefit. This is all the information that I had received today. So I was hoping that each council member would announce their appointments. Or do not?
Does that take time? I think we can just say what the names are, the appointees, and then we should be good to go. Does somebody want to move the resolution?
I'll move it. With which names?
Well, I'll tell you once you move it. and since you spoke, that's a second. So moved by Councilmember Robinson, seconded by Councilmember Siemens. And the names are Nadine Block, Leandra Carrasco, Joe Edgell, Alfie Fair, Timothy Fox, Sherry Friedman, David Hunter, Sachiwan Ikalkalsa, Timothy Mayle, Elizabeth Marshall, Austin Meyerman, Terrell North, Emily Riddle, Scott Shang, Milford Sprecher, Patricia Stevenson, and Catherine Tunis. And that, I believe, is 17 names, and there's our limit is 21, so that it's possible that we could appoint a few more people, and that may happen, and we can do that at a future date. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I did want to point out that there are no Ward 4 appointees to the committee at this time. We've had no volunteers step forward, although I have spoken with several people about the possibility. And so I would like to reserve those spots for Ward 4 members.
Are there other comments? Councilmember Robinson.
Ward 3 was well represented with applicants, and I'm sorry that not all got appointed. I'm hopeful that they can be available for expert testimony and participation in some way or another if called upon, because there are some very talented and knowledgeable people.
Okay. Are there other comments? Is there any public comment on this resolution appointing task force members? If not, I'd just like to return for a moment to the subject that I talked about for a moment at the beginning of the council meeting, which was my attendance at the Local Government Advisory Committee for the Chesapeake Bay meeting last week. And I just wanted to share a little bit of information, and I thought it was appropriate to do it at this point because I wanted to kind of put this on the record so that the task force has this information as they begin to talk about various issues. I know that there's been a lot of concern about general areas in our strategic plan, with a lot of emphasis on our greenhouse gas reduction plan and the carbon footprint of the city, but I wanted to take just a moment to point out some of the issues that will be coming up concerning the Chesapeake Bay and water resources, which will be a particular thing that the city will need to address, but it's something that also will need to be part of public education for our residents. And I want to point out that half the water in the Chesapeake Bay is from the Atlantic Ocean, and the rest drains into the bay from a 64,000 square mile watershed, and that includes parts of 6 states, Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, and all of the District of Columbia. The land-to-water ratio in the Chesapeake Bay is 14-1, which is the highest of any coastal water body in the world. There are about 17 million people living in the watershed, and about 150,000 people move each year into the watershed. Everyone in the watershed lives just a few minutes from one of 100,000 streams and rivers that drain into the bay. And of the 50 largest tributaries that flow into the bay, just 3 deliver 80% of the bay's fresh water, and that's the Susquehanna River, 48%, the Potomac River, 19%, and the James River, 14%. And I just wanted to share a little bit of information that was discussed at this meeting last week. We heard a good deal from Chuck Fox, who's the senior advisor to the EPA administrator for the Chesapeake Bay and the Anacostia River. And of course, the city's waters empty into the Anacostia, which then empties into the Potomac. In terms of the voluntary efforts that have been going on to clean up the bay over the last 20-some years, as I pointed out, there have been voluntary, but that era is going to be over, and everything will be accomplished through regulation, permits, and agreements, especially backed up by the presidential order. And the way they're going to do that is with TMDLs, which are total maximum daily loads on all things that are going into the bay, and those are going to be assigned to various segments of the watershed. The watershed is divided into 92 sectors, and then each of those sectors is divided down from there. In the state of Maryland, the watershed will be subdivided below the county level. Some places are going just to the county level. Maryland is going into smaller areas than just counties. The TMDLs will be assigned in just over a year from now, December 2010, and then every 2 years there will be 2-year agreements, and these will allocate responsibility, and it'll fall on various small portions to meet whatever goals have been set out. Nitrogen loads will have to be reduced by at least 40%, phosphorus loads by at least 30%, and any agreements will have to be enforceable or otherwise binding. That's that's in quotes, that's language that they will use. Agriculture accounts for about half the load in the watershed, and half of that is from animals. So in an overall sense, a quarter of the load on the bay is from people and a quarter from animals. And in the watershed, there's now more turf grass than corn, and they think that there may be more turf grass than all crops combined. For stormwater, which will most directly affect us, the draft regulations call for new or redeveloped properties to retain 95% of stormwater on site, and that means retaining a 1.5-inch to 1.7-inch storm on site. And a large part of how that's going to happen is through retrofits to reduce the load, so it's not just going to be on new building, and that's going to be something that the city is going to have to deal with. There's also the potential for making large organizations make those reductions on their own, and I thought of the Washington Adventist Hospital site as one of those. Mr. Fox made the point that it'll be much better to rely on state or local regulations rather than federal regulations, because for those of you who are familiar with the federal regulation process, it takes way longer to implement than either state or local processes. We also heard from a representative from the Center for Watershed Protection in Ellicott City, and they do stormwater plans for parks and municipal facilities. They provide design guidance and assistance with grants, and this position was funded by the Bay Program for Maryland and Virginia after lobbying by the Local Government Advisory Committee for such a position. And just one other interesting bit of information, we had a good bit of discussion about Marcellus Shale, which is the rock formation in much of New York State and Pennsylvania, with some coming down into Maryland as well, and learned the whole process for extracting gas from shale, where they drill down and then laterally for about 6,000 feet and send water in there under high pressure and blast it apart and fracture the shale and extract the gas. They said the way that you can understand this is if you go to this shale and you break off a little bit of the surface that's showing like on a rock face, and then get to the new unexposed part, take a piece of it and strike it with a hammer, you'll have a little spark, and that's the gas that's in the shale that gets released. And on a large scale, that's what they're trying to do. And so companies are coming in to try and do that. As the price of natural gas has dropped, those rigs have moved from Texas and areas in the south, and currently they estimate that 70 to 80% of all oil rigs are in Pennsylvania. And the way that it affects the bay is that all of the byproduct from that blasting process with the water generates huge amounts of salt and other polluted water that ends up in the bay. So there was a lot of discussion about that. I don't think that's something we're going to have to deal with, but I thought it was interesting that 70 to 80% of all the oil rigs in the country are now in Pennsylvania. So I just wanted to...
Pennsylvania? So I'll start it there.
And since 48% of the water in the bay comes from the Susquehanna, that's all coming from Pennsylvania and New York. So I just wanted to make some information available to the task force to let them know that a lot of this is coming down the pike, and it's coming down soon, and it's something that we as a city are going to have to deal with, and it's something that we're going to be going a lot more to our residents and explaining ways that they can help meet the goals for cleaning up the bay, because if we don't meet it, there will be penalties. We're not sure what those will be yet. They could be a lack of funds that nobody has. They could be civil or criminal penalties. I'm not sure how they're going to work that. Councilmember Siemens and then Councilmember Robinson.
I'd just like to follow up on one thing that you, one piece of the information you were giving. You said that 1/4 of the pollution load is from animals. Are you somehow positioning yourself for a dog ordinance in any way?
More reason to clean up.
Yeah.
A lot of that was from now they concentrate on kind of the grouping of animals, but a lot of it has to do with animal waste and how a lot of that washes into the bay because it's not sheltered from rain and things like that. It just washes into streams and heads on down.
There's a lot of farm animals.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson and then Councilmember Wright.
I just want to say that I'm lucky enough to be in the Council of Governments Climate, Energy, and Environmental Policy Committee. It's the first committee I've been in, the first involvement I've had with the Council of Governments. They are talking about an 80% reduction of gases to try to get climate change under control over the next 35 years, which is a long-range goal, but they've adopted that goal, and it's phased in. There are 56 people on that committee, represented many entities in the Washington area are represented, so it's a large committee as well. I'm not quite sure how they'll handle it, but not as well as our committee, I'm sure. I'm pressing them to help us with laws and policies that we can use in our small city. And I'm hopeful that that will be a collaborative process from all of the other municipalities and other entities in the area. One note that I'll make is that in Arlington, of the problems, 4% of the problems are represented by the city. So that's not to let us off the hook, but the vast majority of the issues at hand are in private homes and other uses. So it's a matter of our leveraging our own selves and our own residents to affect the changes that we need to make. So I'm lucky to be on that committee, and I'll make a point of bringing lessons as best I can to our committee.
Councilmember Wright.
I was just curious, and I think it's good that Daryl's still here while we're talking about this, whether she feels like help from this new task force would be helpful on the Bay issues, or do you feel like you have a handle on that stuff? Because I know they have a lot on their plate, and we kind of did focus on greenhouse gas emission stuff in the original resolution, but just wanted to see if you...
The city engineer is fairly well informed about the upcoming requirements on the state level for changes to the NPDES permit. We are permitted through the state. There will no doubt be some more informational sessions that the state will hold for municipalities, but we are in communication with them. The city is a little bit ahead of the curve, and then our current stormwater ordinance is far better than many of the other jurisdictions that are currently now going to have to make a very big step to meet the federally mandated and state required guidelines. So it's not to say we couldn't use the help, though my understanding of where we are with that is it's very much a regulatory and legislative process. We need to enforce our stormwater controls. We need to update our permit requirements. There's going to be additional requirements on the part of developers and or folks enhancing the properties to meet more restrictive guidelines. So a lot of what I understand the change to be coming down the pipe to our Title 16 is more of a regulatory or legislative nature.
But I think it'll be helpful to have that task force aware of a lot of the issues that are coming our way, so that as there can be ways that we can publicize to our residents what they're going to need to deal with, that we get it to them sooner rather than later, so that there are no surprises as they try and do something and come a cropper of the changed environment that is coming very soon.
Sure. I think the other piece of that is currently we're set up in a regulatory manner, and we deal with permit processes for stormwater control. We also have our own system maintenance requirements and testing requirements. Those are going to be made more strict, and we're on tap to meet those requirements and have the pieces in place so that we can do additional testing. We'll be able to identify what our daily maximum load is currently and how far we are from the new mandated standards. So a lot of that is in the works. The piece that is yet to be created is the best interface on the part of city residents for programs like the county is exploring with rain gardens, and Friends of Sligo Creek has been exploring with those kind of things, downspout diversions, rain gardens, controlling stormwater on your own property. The city doesn't have a way to capture that issue yet, because right now we're dealing with it in a permit process when you're redeveloping or purchasing or expanding a home. So measures to take in your own yard when you're doing nothing else other than you want to control your stormwater. That's the piece of it that we have not yet created for the city and may, in fact, be required in order to meet the kind of control standards that we're going to be asked to meet.
And I had discussions with our staff for the committee from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, who had a lot of interest in pulling together resources to help people understand that and make them happen. They wanted to put together a dog and pony show and bring it to us first. Other comments? Is there any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, we'll vote on this resolution. All those in favor appointing members to the Task Force on Environmental Action, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. We will now move to our work session. We have two items. The first one is discussion of installation of a raised crosswalk to replace a speed hump on Westmoreland Avenue.
A bit of background on this issue. As you know, the city recently resurfaced Westmoreland Avenue after the long-awaited and much-needed street work through WSSC, and that block of Westmoreland from Carroll to Walnut Elm Avenue has been resurfaced. There were 4 existing speed humps on that block. 2 have been replaced, 2 others remain. As the city engineer was evaluating the installation with our contractor, I think he actually had a suggestion from a passerby or a playground user that said, hey, for that last speed hump, why don't you think about putting in a raised crosswalk instead of a speed hump? He gave it a little thought, thought it was a good idea, came in and chatted with me about it. We took a look at the administrative regulations and realized that the regulations do speak to that in terms of identifying a process for the city to go through when it thinks it might like to make a change to a speed hump that currently exists. Some of the benefits of changing that existing speed hump to a raised crosswalk is you are at a playground there where a lot of people walk from either side of the street to get into the playground, so you would basically be creating a designated walk area where not everyone, but the majority of people would choose to walk across the raised crosswalk to get into the playground versus what they do now, which is just cross at various locations, whichever seems the best to them, across the street and through the parked cars. Because there was an existing traffic calming measure there, a speed hump, it would be putting another traffic calming measure there in its place, so it would be accomplishing the physical barrier that reduces the speed of traffic going down that hill as it currently exists now. There is some additional cost to a raised crosswalk versus a speed hump. It's at least twice as much in expense. Speed humps tend to cost about $1,500. This would be on the order of $3,000, perhaps more. We've gone through the required process for the administrative regulation, which basically said if the city wants to consider that change, it needs to inform the people in the affected block and give them the opportunity to discuss it with the city council at a council meeting, hence on the agenda this evening. You see in your attachment the flyer that we passed out to the neighbors on the affected block and a little illustrative picture of what a raised crosswalk typically looks like. We also communicated with the neighborhood association through Bruce Moyer, who's here tonight, and asked that he share information with residents and wanted to make sure that the neighborhood association was aware of that. The only other additional information that I have is in making some more detailed measurements and evaluation of the location. The city engineer informed me today that currently there's a metered parking spot that would likely either have to be eliminated or moved in order for the raised crosswalk to work. Because what you have now is an area where a car can park, though it is very close, only 7 feet away from a fire hydrant. So actually it raises some concern in our mind now about the location of that metered parking space so near to a fire hydrant. It probably violates distance requirements. However, parking is a very sensitive issue, as Bruce, I'm sure, will discuss, on Westmoreland Avenue and the balance of commercial parking versus residential parking, and that road is quite parked up. We have had a request from the neighborhood organization to do some parking marks on the street after we've paved the street because of the sensitivity of how close people park to people's driveway aprons, and someone might park right in the middle of a space that could actually take 2 cars. And when you have homes without driveways, parking can become a real sore spot. So the option that we've really yet to flush out in any real great sense is we'll no longer be able to have that metered parking space in the location it is now, because the raised crosswalk will need access that can't be blocked by a parked car. So we either have to move that meter down below the entrance to the first commercial driveway area there, or eliminate it. So that's a question that I don't know the answer to, and I don't know whether or not we will have had enough public input, because that's a new piece of information that I just learned this afternoon. Let's see, is there anything else? Barring that, I think that's pretty much the full picture of the situation there.
Can I just say that my first reaction to your latest piece of information about the
meter
need to do something about that meter is that it sounds like if you go ahead and provide some marking on the pavement that delineates areas for parking, that may in fact kind of make available another space or two in terms of the unmetered parking below. And it seems to me that when the work gets finished on the parking lot behind the businesses in Old Town, that it's possible that there will be some more parking there as well. So it may be that the balance of the unmetered neighborhood parking and the metered business parking may gain, each piece may gain some, in spite of the fact that that metered one is taken out. My initial sense would be to say, do those markings in the unmetered area and kind of see what the balance is and how that works out, and that may drive whether something needs to be done. But my sense from that is you might be able to just eliminate that metered spot. There will probably end up being more places for commercial parking and more places for residential parking if you do that and line things. Councilmember Robinson.
I'm a little bit reluctant to bring this particular point up. It's a beam counter, a numbers point, and that is that the raised walks in intersections, we've been quoted as 15,000 to put in. And as I'm looking at the specs here, this baby's 22 feet wide, which is about as wide as both of those tables stuck together and goes all the way across.
Yeah, you have a 6-foot ramp on either side and a 10-foot top. In our case, we don't have enough space for a 10-foot top, so probably more like 8 or 9 feet, and you'd have the 6-foot elevations to each side.
Okay. I'm only bringing up the I think it's great if you could put it in for $3,000. I'm a little surprised in that one that fills an intersection, which is not a lot wider than that, is 5 times that amount. So I'm just a little curious as to why the
amount of
cost
asphalt in
difference.
a raised intersection is 4 or 5 times more than the raised crosswalk.
Okay, that answers.
You've got the width that it has to go across, as well as one direction. You've got the crossing direction, and you still have to have the interface with the street itself. So usually your 6-foot ramps are outside the intersection, and your raised intersection is in the intersection itself.
Okay, I knew you'd have an answer, but I thought
It's a huge amount of asphalt.
Yeah.
It also takes a higher level of setup. You have to have points marked all throughout the intersection. It's a more complicated endeavor to get right because you have many more points that you have to make sure of and elevations that you have to match across a wider space. They're never very simple. They're always more complicated than one would imagine. This particular street is made more complicated by the fact that it's on a slope, which is never ideal for speed tables
Right.
or raised crosswalks. You'd ideally like them on a flat location.
Of course.
So basically, what we have to have is the raised crosswalk matching the grade of the street, so it'll be on an angle. It won't feel like an angle. You won't feel like you're walking cattywampus because it's going to match the grade of the street. But if you were to make it flat, you would have a 9-inch or
Too
more
much
raise
of
on
a-
one
yeah.
side and nothing on the other, so you have to compensate. It's, needless to say, our contractor doesn't like to see us raising these ideas because it's a headache and requires his best and most experienced field guys in order to pull this off.
Well, good, make them work. As far as the placement goes, I do note that you have a 5-foot access from the sidewalk to the crosswalk, and I don't know if that, I mean, I can understand why you wouldn't want people parking on this crosswalk to block the access from the sidewalk, but it's only a 5-foot sidewalk, not a 22-foot sidewalk access to the crosswalk. And I'm just hoping that in your allocation of spaces and markings and so forth, maybe you can take that into consideration as well and make sure that we leave the 5-foot access, but at the same time not lose any parking. So I'm with Mayor Williams on the let's not lose any parking if we can, but I'm in support of putting this in.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Wright.
Can we talk to, so let me make sure I know exactly what this is. This will run from the playground across the street to that sort of, which is part of the Bruce Levin's building, that lower building that's not really.
Right, on the top side of the parking, of the driveway ramp into that back section off Westmoreland.
And it sounds like we tried to do a good job of consulting with the residents. Do we talk to the businesses like Thankful Soul?
I haven't had any conversation with the businesses, no.
Okay, I suggest we reach out to the businesses, even though it's not required by ordinance, just to sort of, if I was a business owner and all of a sudden, one of my prime parking spaces, off of this crosswalk, be sort of surprised that I'm not talking. So that maybe we should talk to them about what's going on. What about, and this is kind of a rare thing for us, we don't usually put crosswalks in big blocks, so are we going to need to do any sort of additional paddle signage, because it gives the pedestrians sense that they're safety going across, but I'd be concerned that bicyclists may not be totally aware of the.
At this point, we're not planning to do any more additional signage than we do for speed humps themselves, which is just a warning sign in either direction. However, the road markings will be a crosswalk marking, which is a pretty typically well-known design for drivers to be aware of in terms of, if you see the solid double 12-inch lines and hatched marks, that's a crosswalk. So at this point, we're just planning a sign in either direction that lets people know they're coming up to a traffic calming measure. The language on the sign, I don't yet know what the city engineer is planning.
Because I have some raised crosswalks in the middle of blocks have those kind of paddle. Visual marker to cars go. And then the last question I have is, do we also, because it sounds like we're planning on existing, we're planning on painting some parking spaces. Are we also planning to repaint the crosswalks there at the top of Westmoreland and on Carroll? Because when we changed the construction of the sidewalk, now the crosswalks are misaligned. Particularly at Carroll, it's really bad. It's like 10 feet from where the handicap ramps are.
My understanding of the crosswalk at Westmoreland is actually a requirement for the WSSC contractor to put back in, and Alana Blanchard's been in communication with the state highway folks that are supposed to be overseeing that installation. The one further down at the bend in Carroll Avenue, I would need to check with Alana. I don't know what is currently planned for the remarking of that area.
Okay, that's something I've asked about previously. It seems like a logical thing that they should change because it's not really effective in helping keep people safe.
So is the sense that people want to go forward with this, and when it comes, we'll have some answers to the questions that have been raised.
Yep,
Okay.
as long as we check with the businesses.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay. Do you have everything you need?
I think so. In terms of checking with the businesses, is this particular to the tenant most affected, or do you want me to coordinate with Roz and?
I'd say coordinate with Roz.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only other thing, I know we don't usually take public comment during the work session, but I don't know, because we do have Bruce here, if he had anything to add or say.
Okay. So we're all set. Thank you. And the final item on our agenda tonight is a discussion of adding flexibility to the time limit on parking meters. Is the city manager going to introduce that one, or? Oh, okay. Director of Housing and Community Development.
It's really cold in here, guys.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it's freezing.
Not before, so we're still roasting.
We'll talk some more.
Yeah, if you want to warm up, just go up into the conference room upstairs. That was really warm earlier.
Good evening. The council is being asked to consider this evening the existing ordinance as it applies to the installation of parking meters. And listening to Daryl's conversation, it's quite appropriate as far as timing. What I've done in the memorandum is include the text of the city ordinance as it applies to parking meters. And you'll note that it's really quite specific in terms of this establishes individual parking zones, which include very exact information about where those zones are established, the exact number of parking meters that are to be in each of those zones in those specific locations, and identifies the cost for the parking meter as far as the timing. So, for example, the meter she was talking on Westmoreland Avenue, that is in a 2-hour parking zone, costs you $1 for 2 hours. That particular zone is specifically between Westmoreland Avenue, south of the curve from the center radius of the turn of the intersection with Carroll Avenue to a point of 260 degrees southwest, and it's supposed to have 5 meters. While that is quite helpful, it does limit our ability to some extent to respond in a more timely manner to some of the requests we get from the businesses in the area. It would affect Daryl's ability to decide whether or not to pull that meter, or if she can create another paid parking spot to install a new meter, because we'd all have to go back before the council and go through the work session ordinance, first reading of the ordinance, second reading of the ordinance. Many of you may be aware that Old Tacoma Business Association has requested that the meters on Carroll Avenue, which are immediately in front of the stores along there, during the construction of the surface parking lot, that they be temporarily, the time be increased for a 2-hour limit as opposed to the 30-minute that is currently there. That 30-minute was initially established at the request of the community, as people wanted a couple of spaces where they could park, run into the post office, run out, and leave. The way the ordinance is written now is we have no flexibility of doing that. We cannot just go and say, makes sense to me, I know it's only going to be for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months, whatever it is, or that we found a new opportunity to install an additional meter, or we want to do a speed hump and tear one out. We don't have that flexibility to do that. And we're asking you tonight if you think it's appropriate that we do have that flexibility, or if you would like us to continue the way the ordinance is structured now with all this specificity regarding those particular zones. In chatting with the city attorney, there is an option to incorporate language very similar to what you have in the ordinance now as it applies to what they call traffic devices, which is my understanding are signs, where the city manager at his or her discretion, based on a set of standards, can establish or put up parking signs or no parking signs or stop signs without having to go to the city council each and every time. And one of the opportunities or one of the possibilities you have is to establish a similar language in the ordinance as it applies to parking meters. Basically eliminate all those little definitions about this 260 degrees radius and just identify the general parking, types of parking zones that you want, 30-minute, 2-hour, 4-hour, 8-hour, whatever they are. And then let the city manager, using a set of established criteria, establish where those particular zones are, and based on the parameters of that particular space, how many meters are appropriately placed there.
And if I can just add an example of another area where the council has tried to give a little flexibility on things is with speed humps. Originally, speed hump ordinances specified the number of speed humps and their location. And if it became obvious that somebody wanted to, have 2 instead of 3 or 3 instead of 2 on a block or a stretch of blocks, they'd have to go through the whole process all over again, the petitions and everything, and come back to make that little adjustment. And that was changed so that whenever ordinances come forward for speed humps and traffic calming and things like that, unless it's a particular neighborhood thing like we just had earlier this evening with a particular location of a circle, you'll notice that the speed hump pieces in there pointed with an arrow kind of mid-block, but it didn't say there will only be one in that block, and it will be in front of the telephone pole in front of 7302 Wildwood or whatever it might be, so that there is that flexibility to move it later. And I think one of the places where that flexibility was needed and used, I think I'm correct, is the one that we just talked about in terms of that speed hump added at the top of Westmoreland. That I don't know whether we had to go through the process again.
It's a raised crosswalk, which is different than a speed hump.
Yeah, but it was a speed hump.
Well, it was a speed hump.
And the installation of that speed hump was not in the original process, and so I think we had to go through to add it. So that's another area where we've said, no, let's step away from specifying every particular on something. We provide the policy, we provide the guidelines, and staff can operate within them. Councilmember Wright and Councilmember Smith.
I'm supportive of going to a more flexible approach. I think with parking meters, it's a little bit different than some street signage, so I would like some sort of component where the council's just notified of the change in advance, like, I don't know, if it's a 30-day notification or 14-day notification, some amount of time that is actually written down that the council's told that the city manager's going to make some change in the parking, but it doesn't require a double reading, 2-reading change to the code.
Councilmember Seaman.
Thank you, Mayor. I think yes, there needs to maybe be some additional flexibility from what we have now, but I think it's still important that the council be involved for the larger policy issues. And I think back to the changes in Old Town recently. It's probably a couple years ago now, but it was putting in some short-term parking, actually eliminating some of the longer-term parking because it was being used by commuters, or at least there was the impression it was being used by commuters. And so we decreased some of the long-term parking meters to shorter term. And now the Old Town business owners are saying, well, but not that short, we want it longer. And I think at that level of discussion that maybe the council should be involved.
Are you referring to meters other than the ones on Laurel Avenue, or?
There were the ones on Laurel Avenue.
The reason I'm asking is the only changes, for the changes on Laurel Avenue, that went through the whole process as far as the city council with the ordinance adoption and the city soliciting public comment. There have been other changes with the meters in the Old Town area, but because of the way the streets are, there's a lot of it, that's DC.
Right, and that was part of the discussion at that time, was that half of what they were asking for was involved in the District of Columbia. But again, I think that that level of discussion was appropriate for the council to be involved in, but I think some of the much more detailed criteria that's in the current ordinance probably doesn't need to come to the council every time for those types of changes. So, again, I'm supportive of maybe backing off of the detail that's in the ordinance today, but I would not back off too far.
Other comments, Councilmember Victoria?
I noticed that rates are specifically listed here, and wondering if that is part of the specificity. Should we have the city manager setting rates, or again, Councilmember Siemens? Do you consider that? It seems like a lot to put it in here specifically down to 6 minutes, but.
We haven't really chatted about that, but that's what, when I was talking to Linda Perlman about this, the recommendation she had regarding the provisions that she was suggesting be deleted do include the rates. So there may be, if you're comfortable with it, a possibility of just including language that says rates shall be established on an annual basis, and do it just as a pro forma type of thing where we just set the rate each year depending upon what's going on with parking revenues. So you wouldn't have to include it in such specificity as it is in the ordinance now.
And rewrite the code every time you want to
Right,
change
and it
rates.
gives you sort of you can incorporate it in the budgeting process too, when you're thinking lots of dimes, nickels and dimes.
Councilmember Robinson?
Well, it's kind of Napoleon, the way it is now. Napoleonic code specified every darn thing that you were supposed to do, and that seems silly. And the other thing that comes to mind is how the state law is written as regards sale of alcoholic beverages. As I recall, each municipality has a voluminous section about exactly where and when alcohol will be served and sold, and it seems equally Napoleonic and absurd. I think this might be a good opportunity for us to think about something we've talked about for a long time, and that's a parking district. And I'm not suggesting that approach of a parking district be the only option of rewriting the code at this time. I'm in favor of softening the approach and giving us more of giving our staff more of a more leeway in working with this. But I do think that there has to be some outreach to the public, and I do know that the Business Association has for years had an interest in managing parking in some way or another. And we've talked about a parking district, or something that's a little more formal called a parking authority, which is probably beyond our reach right now. But having a way to get feedback from the business community and from residents as regards parking, I'd like to see some way to blend that in.
Any other comments? I was just discussing electrical connections of computers at the dais. Do you have what you need to come back to us with the rewrite?
Yep.
Okay, good. Then we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Public comments? Regarding the task force on environmental action, the way that was just, the membership was just approved, I believe that was improperly done. You didn't get an official second, Mayor Williams. You
Yeah, I
simply
did.
said, oh, Terry, you spoke, so that's a second.
That's a second.
Oh, really? You can do that?
Anybody speaking is a second.
Anybody speaking is a second. Okay. Well, I'd like to ask, since the spirit of it seemed to be that each council member was going to appoint 3 people, I'd like to ask each council person to just name the 3 people that they appointed for the benefit of the citizens of Tacoma Park. I mean, you read the list. We don't know how it's geographically apportioned. I'd like to know. And, you know, if Councilmember Siemens is nobody from Ward 4, is that correct? But there didn't seem to be anything specific in the resolution that said that council members had to appoint people from their ward. So if you're missing some members there, council member, I'm happy to volunteer. You could appoint me. You only got 17, you still got four spaces open.
Right, that was one thing that I had considered was whether to appoint people from outside of my ward. That's been a topic of discussion in the council, among the council in the past for other committees.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the decision this time that since we did not have any Ward 4 members, but there are still some people who I'm hopeful will volunteer for it, that I would retain those openings for
Mhm.
Future appointment.
They got 9 days, I think, right? I mean, because the task force is going to meet for 6 months, so September 30th to March 31st. Okay. So, anybody want to start? I mean, who did you all appoint?
We can, if people, if we can give you the list.
Why don't you just say it
I'm glad to say.
in an open meeting?
I'm glad to say who I appointed. I
Sure.
appointed Nadine Block, Leandro Carrasco, and Patricia Stevens.
Councilmember Victoria? Did you appoint 3 people? I'm asking you.
There were no Ward 6 applicants, so I evaluated the resumes and applications we had and appointed Austin Meyerman, Alfie Fair, and Timothy Fox.
Hi. I appointed Terrell North, who is happens to be a Ward 5 resident, and where'd it go? Sachiwan Ikalson, who is not.
And I'm happy to tell you, I don't particularly like feeling bullied up here, but.
Not bully. You don't have to do anything, Bruce.
Well,
you didn't even have to have me up here for public comment.
Right.
I mean,
So,
you can do whatever you
know,
want.
I'm happy to do it, but
You've
I
made
just don't
that
want to
clear.
feel like it's an inquisition up here.
Oh.
But I appointed
Off with his head.
Sherry Friedman, David Hunter, and Catherine Tunis.
And Terry, nobody for you. Okay. Councilmember, right? I wanted to be on the committee. So, you know, I just think the spirit of it, from what I gleaned listening to the work sessions, was that each person was going to appoint, each council member was going to appoint 3 people. Then when you did it, the mayor just said, oh, that takes too much time. I'll just read the list. I don't know. It seems a little condescending to the citizens of Tacoma Park. But maybe I'm the only one who's curious. But hey, I'm up here. If you don't want to say, you don't have to say.
I'm happy to say that. I don't think anyone is trying to hide anything.
No, of course not.
From anybody at all. You know, I just would say, it seems you're a little upset about not getting.
Well, I wanted to get on the task force. Yeah,
And,
sure.
That doesn't
I'll
mean
admit
that
it.
there's not ways that you can't.
I wanted to volunteer. You know, I wanted to serve on the task force.
I know you did.
You got 4 spots, but hey, that's fine.
So my names are all people from Ward 1, Emily Riddle, Scott Shang, and Milford Spreacher.
That's great. Well, I hope they do a great job. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Steve, I'd like to talk with you this week, and you know, I still.
Why?
About your interest in being appointed to the task force?
Okay, sure.
Okay,
Absolutely. I'll follow up with you.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we were adjourned before.